We live in a world filled with conflict. Down through our history, nations have used conflict as a means to an end. Men have fought for right, for wrong, for religion, for borders, and even for nothing at all. Every culture on Earth has been forged in a conflict over territory or ideals. In 6,000 years of recorded history, there have been more than 14,000 wars, and those are just the ones we know about, leaving countless millions of innocents maimed or homeless and many millions more killed. We have spent billions, even trillions of dollars building and designing for war, and the specter of war still looms over us. We have celebrated the ends of wars and we have honored our war heroes, but the threat of conflict always returns. Our history is filled with seemingly innocent-looking men who preach lofty ideals and hide a true face of death and evil intentions. Still, we have learned so little while acquiring so much knowledge. We have developed ways not only to kill our enemies, but to destroy ourselves and our world forever. The horror of combat has been replaced by mass murder from a very disconnected distance. Russia loomed in our fears for so long and then slowly faded into an almost romantic view of its terrifying history that gave birth to violent conflicts all over the world. Vietnam, Korea, China, and Europe all felt the sting of evil that seemed to have no end. Yet in the sea of our habitual warmongering, still a cry for peace went up. Today, protests continue everywhere, yet even those peaceful protests have the appearance of conflict. Is civilization destined to extinguish itself in the darkness of our mindless primal lust for violence? Surviving ourselves doesn't even seem possible. Yet in the middle of this sea of endless conflict, there is a cry for peace from the same species that constantly wages war against itself. Can we have peace? Or have we had the key to peace and lost it? Was there anything that could have saved us from all of this killing and destruction? An event that could save our world, not only now, but in the future?
During World War I in the little village of Fatima, Portugal in 1917, mere weeks before the Bolshevik Revolution took place in the far-off country of Russia, 3 young children had an experience that was to have global significance and consequence. These 3 Portuguese shepherd children were visited by an apparition of a woman in glowing white on May 13, 1917, while tending their sheep in a cova near the village of Fatima. Lucia dos Santos and her cousins Jacinta and Francisco Marto, aged 10, 8, and 7, were told by the lady that they would be given a message of great importance to the world that would have great significance for the 20th century and beyond. She told them to come and meet with her at the same location on the 13th of every month until October, when she would perform a great miracle. Honoring her request, the children came in June and again in July, when they were accompanied by 6,000 pilgrims. The local priest in Fatima, questioning the authenticity of the children's visions, believed it was more likely a deception of the devil then a true apparition of what the children had determined was the Blessed Virgin Mary. Some of the people of the village shared the ideas of the priest, and the children were told to remain silent. In August, the 3 children were kidnapped by Oliveira, the mayor of nearby Orem. They were interrogated in hopes that they would recant what they believed they had seen. After being threatened with death, they stood firm in their story and were released from custody on August 15th, having missed their appointment with the Virgin.
The question we need to ask ourselves is if the story of these 3 children is credible.
You have the credibility of the seers themselves, the 3 little children, Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta. On July 13th, Our Lady showed the children a vision of hell. But also on July 13th, they were given a secret that they were not allowed to reveal. A month later, on August 13th, they were literally arrested, more like kidnapped.
The administrator of the town of Orem, which is a big town near Fatima at the time, he insisted that the 3 children come down to him for interrogation on the 11th or 12th of August. Now, the 2 children, the 2 youngest, didn't go because their father said, they're too small, because they'd fall off the donkey. Well, Lucy went there. She fell off the donkey 3 times. He got there and he insisted on her telling the secret and her denying that she was seeing Our Lady at Fatima. She would not do what he wanted. He threatened her with death even then. But on the 13th, the morning of the 13th, when the big crowd was there, about 15,000 people, the administrator came to Ajustel, the little town where they lived near Fatima, and he said, I've changed my mind. I'm convinced. I want to be part of the apparitions. So he went there to the home of Jacinta and Francesco and had them join him in his car. He first went to the parish priest's house, and then from there, instead of driving to the site of the apparitions, he drove off in the direction of Orem. He kidnapped them under a pretext, under false pretenses. And he kept them in jail. First he brought them to his home, and then he kept them in jail for 2 days. And he offered them money, he offered them candies if they would just cooperate. They would not deny seeing Our Lady, they would not tell the secret.
They were threatened with death. They were threatened with death. If you do not tell me the secret, you will be boiled in oil. Jacinta was 7 years old. They said, okay, we'll start with you. You're the youngest. You get boiled first. Or else you reveal the secret or you're boiled in oil. She said, no. You don't do that for a lie. Same thing with Francisco, the little boy. Tell us the secret or you'll be boiled in oil. I cannot tell the secret. I told the lady I would not. Little boys don't act like that when they're lying. You threaten a little boy with a spanking and it comes out, let alone being boiled in oil. Lucy was left. Her 2 cousins, as far as she was concerned, were dead. Not only dead, but killed in a horrible way. Reveal the secret or else. And although she didn't say this, but her response basically was, you just have to kill me with my cousins because I cannot reveal the secret. You don't do that for a lie.
In September, the children again honored their responsibility to the Lady, and they were accompanied this time by 30,000 pilgrims. With a great miracle promised for the month of October, the 3 children were accompanied by 70,000 witnesses to see the event that would later be known as the Miracle of the Sun. This spectacular event was witnessed and reported by various members of the secular press, giving international credence and recognition to the 3 children and to the message that they had received. The message was that the entire world would experience peace if the Rosary were prayed every day and if Russia were consecrated by the Pope and all his bishops to the Immaculate Heart of Mary.
At the appointed hour, Lucy said, look at the sun. And the sun literally spun off colors, danced in the sky, and then came plummeting toward the earth. 70,000 people saw that.
70,000 people had assembled to see this miracle, which had been predicted 3 months in advance. And at that time, not only believers, but secular news journalists, communists, atheists, scientists who were on the scene saw these incredible things happening with the sun. The sun rotated in the sky and threw off colors. It spun around in the sky, and finally it descended to earth and terrified the entire crowd.
So clearly this is a public event. God is getting the attention of the world. And for the church to say, well, because this isn't part of the deposit of faith, therefore you can take it or leave it, is absurd.
If there wasn't that smashing, impossible miracle back then, I probably wouldn't believe the message at all. But you cannot deny a complete breach of the laws of nature, and that is never done by anybody but God himself to confirm some other thing.
There was raining cats and dogs, and they had been in the field all night for the apparition the next day. They were soaked to the bone. Immediately after the miracle of the sun, the ground was dry and all their clothes were dry. It's as if Our Lady, as a mother, cleaning up her children before she sends them away.
The amount of energy needed to dry out that high altitude sort of grassland, and 70,000 people with it, and the ankle deep mud with it, that's an amount of energy that would have incinerated everybody present. Once I realized that that had happened, I said, okay, that must be authentic. No devil can work that kind of miracle. Because that's a deep interference with the laws of nature.
When God works a miracle, we have the absolute certitude that the message comes from God. Considering that heaven went to this great effort to gain the world's attention, what was it that Our Lady of Fatima was requiring of mankind?
It was said that by Mary to Sister Lucia that the consecration of Russia had to be performed.
Consecration, a ceremony to dedicate a person, place, or thing for a holy purpose.
Mary came to Sister Lucia and said, now is the time for Russia to be consecrated. And if it is consecrated, there will be peace in the world as the nation of Russia is converted. And there was also a warning which said, if you don't do this, if you don't consecrate Russia, then the First World War that had ended is going to create another war, World War II. And there is going to be Russia spreading her errors throughout the world. And this is exactly what happened from 1929 through the rest of the 20th century.
So Russia is seen as the focus of a crisis in the world, and the apparitions at Fatima were literally weeks before the Bolshevik Revolution, at a time when no one could possibly have known what this phrase, Russia's errors, would mean.
She gave very simple and clear instruction. I cannot possibly understand how it would ever be a problem for a pope. She said, the Holy Father must consecrate Russia to my Immaculate Heart, together with the bishops of the world.
And even though it seems in and of itself like an insignificant thing, in the eyes of the world, in terms of geopolitical clout, what can a bunch of bishops all praying a prayer together do to cause tyrannies to topple and empires to collapse? But that is what God does. He chooses the weak, the lowly, the insignificant things of this world to bring about this enormous effect. And that's what would have happened, and what will happen when the consecration is finally done by the grace of God.
Do the Holy Scriptures support this idea of forewarning mankind of impending disasters?
In the Bible, God is always sending prophets when His people begin to get off the straight and narrow path that God has laid out for them. And the purpose of a prophet is to call you back, to get you back on track. And God sends many prophets throughout the Bible, both Old and New Testament. But the quintessential prophet is the prophet Elijah, or Elias, as he's called in the Douay-Rheims Bible. And he is called by God to warn the people of Israel that if they do not turn back to the laws of Moses, that God will strike them with confusion and chaos and this just falling apart, this internal decay and collapse. And the Old Testament ends on that very note.
Throughout the Old Testament, there are instances when the people of Israel would fail in their ritual or symbolic obligations. And the result of that was the fact that the Jewish people were exiled twice. The temple was destroyed. The Old Testament tells us that the failure to obey God's will in the end has to result in national or even international disaster.
there is absolutely zero possibility of true and lasting world peace apart from this demand being obeyed exactly according to God's strict letter. God is very clear about it in the Bible. When He gives a covenant, when He gives a command, He wants it obeyed in just that way. And He will not let us substitute. When God said to the old people, His people in the Old Testament, you must bring such and such a lamb to me. It's got to be a lamb without blemish. If someone said, well, I will, it's too hard for me to get that. It's too inconvenient, but how about this instead? You can't bargain with God. You can't say, instead of this, can I do this? You can't have some sort of spiritual swap meet with God and try to dicker Him down to your terms. And so unless we do exactly what God has requested, no, there's no possibility of this at all. There must be submission to the Queen Mother in order there to be submission to her Son. Again, we honor Mary, we honor Jesus. It's a package deal.
Does consecration work? Apparently it did in Portugal.
On May 13th, 1931, there was that solemn religious procession at Fatima. 300,000 people there. And on that day, the Portuguese bishops solemnly consecrated Portugal to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Portugal before this, of course, had been the scene of, the priests were imprisoned. There was the godless revolution. The faith was in trouble mainly because of the opposition, the bloody opposition of since 1910, that the Portuguese were living under. Humanly speaking, it seems as there's no hope. Our Lady comes to Portugal in 1917. Then the bishops, taking the cue from Sister Lucy actually, consecrated Portugal to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. They consecrated Portugal by name. In fact, in the formula, which you can still get, Portugal is mentioned 5 times. Right after that, there was what they call a threefold miracle that took place in Portugal. First, as a result of that consecration, there was a magnificent rebirth of Catholic life. Secondly, there was miracle, well, I'm using miracle with a lowercase m, okay? The miracle of political and social reform. After decades of a godless government, you had Antonio Salazar come in, and his whole goal was to, number one, be counter-revolutionary, counter-communism, and do everything that he can to construct the social order within the lines of the gospel. As I said, he's going to base his laws of right and wrong on what the gospel teaches is right and wrong, and on what the church teaches is right and wrong. The third and the most spectacular was the miracle of peace. The Spanish Civil War was raging right next door. And the political analysts and everyone who knew anything about what was going on said it's just a matter of time. It's just going to sweep into this poor and helpless country of Portugal. But they were spared that. They were spared all the horrors of the Spanish Civil War, and they made a promise. The bishops collectively made a promise in 1936 that if they were spared the horrors of the Spanish Civil War, if it was kept out of their country, they would consecrate the nation again to the Immaculate Heart of Mary in 1938. So in 1938, the bishops got together and consecrated the nation again to the Immaculate Heart. And here again you have a prophecy and a fulfillment, because in 1939, Sister Lucy wrote to Bishop de Silva and said that heaven made known to her that because of this consecration, Portugal would be spared the horrors of the Second World War, which was just bursting forth. And that's exactly what happened.
But is conversion of an entire nation actually possible? Today, Mexico is largely a Catholic society because of a miracle that took place there in 1531. In what is now known as the town of Guadalupe, the Virgin Mary appeared to Juan Diego and requested that a church be built there in her honor. The ultimate credence was given to his story when he removed his cloak before the local bishop and the inside of his cloak bore this miraculous image of the Virgin herself. The Catholic missionaries had been trying to reach the Aztec people of the region for years without any success, but upon simply seeing this image, they were immediately converted. So many were converted that the priests of Guadalupe could do nothing but baptize new converts from morning till night for 10 years. If this is the power that Our Lady's image is capable of, then how can we deny that it may be possible to convert all of Russia, or even eventually, the entire world?
Stalin was determined on having Austria suffer the same fate that Germany suffered. There were still some people in Austria who believed that Our Lady could do something. And in 1945, interestingly enough, I think it was in 1945, but interestingly enough, it was the Austrian Chancellor Fegel and then Gorbach who were the first ones to pick up the rosary and publicly walk the Ringstrasse nearby to pray for the liberation of Austria. We obviously didn't have to be all too overly afraid of the Americans, British, and French staying in Austria, but we did have enough reasons to be afraid of the Ruskies staying in Austria. So they really prayed hard. Characteristically enough, Cardinal Innitzer, back then Archbishop of Vienna, only joined the Rosary Crusade, as it was immediately called, later on. 10 years, and they were successful. In 1955, we had the Austrian State Treaty, a lot of conditions connected with it, but none of it which really made a difference to the individual life in Austria. And October 26, 1955, which now since 1968 is a public holiday, officially the last occupation soldier pulled out of Austria. It's the only case in history where communism retracted.
Not only retracted, but retracted without bloodshed. And the actual day that retraction began was on May 13th, 1955, the 38th anniversary of the first apparition of Fatima. Coincidence? The party line within the Vatican seems to indicate that the consecration of Russia has already taken place.
There are people, tragically, who are unfortunately, not intentionally perhaps, part of the problem rather than part of the solution, who say that the consecration has already been done. But everybody has to admit that there was no global, public consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary done by the Pope and all the bishops in the world in union with him, which specifically, explicitly mentioned Russia by name. And if we do anything but exactly that, and that is what has been done, it has not been done exactly according to her prescription. And God, therefore, says, I'm not going to bring about the effect unless you do exactly what I say, because what God uses is our humility. And when we say, well, we'll do this instead because we won't get as much geopolitical flack if we don't mention Russia by name, then we're showing that we're still in control. We're still wanting to call the shots. We're saying we can handle this ourselves. And God says, I'm not going to bless that type of pride. I want that total abject surrender, that total humility that says, I will do exactly what you say, God. And again, the Bible is replete with examples of people who try to do something some other way, and it doesn't work. And only when they finally humble themselves and say, okay, we'll do it God's way, does then God bring about the supernatural result.
Immediately after consecrating the world on March 25, 1984, while in prayer before the original statue of Our Lady of Fatima, Pope John Paul II made this request of her: enlighten especially the peoples of which you await our consecration and our confiding, indicating that the consecration had yet to be done.
There is no question that John Paul II took the request for the consecration of Russia very seriously, even if, on the advice of others, he's attempted to do the consecration without a mention of Russia. And the obvious problem with this is that it's impossible to consecrate a place unless you mention the place. And this led a good friend of mine to say, well, it's getting ridiculous. Why don't they just have a ceremony to consecrate everything in the world but Russia? That's how perverse it's become. They've had a consecration of the world, of youth in search of meaning, of the unemployed, of the sick, of everybody and everything but Russia.
After the 1984 consecration, Sister Lucy declared on various occasions that the 1984 consecration was not validly
performed, it was not the consecration that Our Lady of Fatima had asked for. She mentioned this to a journalist by the name of Enrique Romero as she left the convent to cast her vote in the Portuguese election. She also declared quite explicitly in her interview with Sol de Fatima that appeared in 1985 that the consecration of Russia had not been done in the manner requested by Our Lady of Fatima.
There was already a weakness on the part of the leadership of the Church in the 20th century that Pope St. Pius X warned about. And that weakness was tragically displayed by his successor, Pope Benedict XV, and by his successor, Pope Pius XI, Pope during the 20s, who similarly did not make the consecration requested by Our Lady. And by his successor, Pope Pius XII. Whatever wonderfully good things these popes did do, and they did some marvelous things, Pope Pius XI and Pius XII issued some very strong statements about the kingship of Christ. Pope Pius XI in his encyclical Quas Primas. Pope Pius XII had some strong and magnificent things to say. But on this all-important issue, on this touchstone of fidelity to God's prophetic program for the 20th century, they failed to meet this simple request, to do this simple act. And as a result, the Church was consigned by them to weakness, to impotence.
The failure to consecrate Russia is important by virtue of what it symbolizes. It symbolizes an impotent, weak church, unwilling to wage war, unwilling to teach a mankind which has deserted God. It's a fearful church.
What does Russia look like today?
The condition of Russia is probably worse than it ever was. On the outside, they have some influx of capitalistic ideas and Western materialism, and it looks like, you know, they're becoming like us. That in itself is another story, because if they're becoming like us, you know, Americanism and Western mentality, you know, they're on their way downhill, because we aren't very good ourselves. We have more decadence in this country than we've ever had. And we've been exporting that decadence to many countries in the Far East, Russia included. And as a matter of fact, as regards the Catholic Church, they have put a moratorium on the Catholic faith in Russia. Of all the religions in the world, Catholicism is the least represented in Russia. This includes Buddhism, you know, Islam, all the major religions. As a matter of fact, there are no more Catholics in Russia today than there were in 1917 when the visions came to the three-child seers in Fatima. And that's out of a nation of 143 million people. We have less than 600,000 Catholics. So that tells you something.
There's gathering opinion that Russia is on the verge of becoming an international criminal state under the regime of the so-called practicing Christian Vladimir Putin. Right now, the Vatican is openly and publicly protesting the persecution of the Catholic Church in Russia. Russia just conducted a military exercise simulating an attack on the United States. Russia is assisting Iran in its nuclear reactor program and refuses to cease and desist from that. So I think Russia is still spreading its errors throughout the world. They've already spread into Red China, which is shaping up to be a massive military threat to the world's security. So we're in a situation where I don't think we've gotten really a break. I think the break that the message is talking about is a profound period of worldwide peace. How long will it last? I don't know. Will we have the Garden of Eden on earth? Obviously not. But the harbinger of this period would be the miraculous conversion of the Russian people.
There's no Catholic Renaissance in Russia. The Pope broadcast into Moscow. He's not allowed to enter the country. The Pope broadcast into Moscow. It was March of 2002, I believe, and the Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church called it an invasion of Russia. Russia is Catholicism is a minority religion, so there's no Catholic rebirth. Second, there's no political or social reform, only that now the communist nation looks more like the decadent United States. Divorce, homosexuality, abortion running rampant in Russia. Okay, no sign of conversion to Catholicism and no sign of any sort of political and social reform that will make life conducive to living the life of grace. And finally, of course, the third one's very obvious. There is no peace.
Do we have anything to fear from Russia today?
I don't believe Russia is a danger to the world at the moment. No. I think there are far greater dangers in the world than Russia.
Less than 10 minutes. That's how much time we missed World War III by in January of 1995. In Norway, a scientific rocket was launched as a test. Consequently, its flight path took it through Russian airspace. The Norwegian government had notified the Russian air defense, but the documents were apparently lost. The rocket, that was of an American design, alerted nuclear defense systems all over Russia, and Russian missiles were retargeted to their Cold War status in less than 2 minutes. Thousands of warheads trained on North American cities and military installations. President Boris Yeltsin was notified, and he was given less than 10 minutes to decide the fate of the entire world. Fortunately for all of us, he made the right decision. But can a country with thousands of nuclear warheads at its disposal be allowed even one error? Do we truly have nothing to fear? Anatoly Golitsyn was an ex-KGB agent who defected to the United States in 1961. With the benefit of his intimate knowledge of the communist agenda, he wrote 2 books of warning, New Lies for Old and The Perestroika Deception. His accuracy for predicting the future behavior of communism and the Soviet Union was rated at an astonishing 94%. The content of those predictions are particularly alarming today.
Golitsyn said that the plan formulated by Gorbachev for the world, called perestroika or restructuring, was not just for the restructuring of Russia. It seemed that way, but it was for the restructuring of the West, for the thinking of the West, to think that perhaps the Soviet Union was collapsing, democracy was coming there, democracy was coming across Eastern Europe, the fall of the Berlin Wall, for instance. All of these things were predicted because they were all planned to make the West think that communism was collapsing and would no longer be a threat to the West, so that we could converge, the West and Russia and the communist system, to bring about this whole one world system in which communism would rule the roost and the West would be under the system. And in order for us to be fooled, they decided to change what is called the image of the enemy, but not actually the enemy itself. People have been led to believe that what they think are actual changes, they have been led to believe that these are serious, deep changes in philosophy, in communism, and that communism has seen the light and is becoming more capitalistic, more like the West, when it's actually a cosmetic change. And I guess in the West, people are very materialistic. They're not paying attention. So long as it looks like the danger has gone away from Russia, fine, we'll just get on with our lives.
War to the hilt between communism and capitalism is inevitable. Today, of course, we are not strong enough to attack. Our time will come in 20 or 30 years. To win, we shall need the element of surprise. The Western world will have to be put to sleep, so we shall begin by launching the most spectacular peace movement on record. There will be electrifying overtures and unheard of concessions. The capitalist countries, stupid and decadent, will rejoice to cooperate in their own destruction. They will leap at another chance to be friends, and as soon as their guard is down, we shall smash them with our clenched fist. Professor Dmitry Menvelsky at the Lenin School of Political Warfare in Moscow.
Are there consequences for ignoring the validity of Our Lady's requests?
What we haven't yet seen, and which is the most dreadful thing from the aspect of the secular world, is the annihilation of nations that Our Lady predicted as the end result of the failure to make this timely consecration. Even though in the end, as the message itself says, the Holy Father will consecrate Russia. My hope is that when he does consecrate Russia, he won't be standing in front of a blast crater that used to be the Vatican. And there have even been papal visions in that respect. Pius X is reported in the histories of his pontificate to have had a vision of a future pope fleeing the Vatican over the dead bodies of his subordinates. And the vision of the Bishop in White, published by the Vatican, does indeed speak of the Pope going through a half-ruined city surrounded by bodies, going to the top of a hill and praying in front of a large cross where he is executed by a band of soldiers. So, if one believes in these apparitions, that is, if one is a Catholic who takes seriously the Church's confirmation of the authenticity of the vision, one has to be worried about what's happening in the world today and whether this is leading toward the annihilation of nations. And this isn't just crackpot stuff. A lot of non-believers have the sense that the world is hurtling towards some kind of apocalyptic confrontation in the Middle East, nuclear war between India and Pakistan. You don't have to be a Catholic to think that maybe we're in the worst possible time of world history in terms of our very survival as a civilization.
In 1946, Professor William Thomas Walsh, author of the best-selling book Our Lady of Fatima, was granted a rare interview with Sister Lucy. Professor Walsh, summarizing Sister Lucy's remarks, said Lucy made it plain that Our Lady did not ask for the consecration of the world to her Immaculate Heart. What she demanded specifically was the consecration of Russia. Then Professor Walsh tells us that Sister Lucy made the following statement. What Our Lady wants is that the Pope and all the bishops of the world shall consecrate Russia to her Immaculate Heart on one special day. If this is done, she will convert Russia and there will be peace. If it is not done, the errors of Russia will spread through every country in the world. Professor Walsh then asked, does this mean, in your opinion, that every country without exception will be overcome by communism? Sister Lucy responded, yes. Clarifying further, Professor Walsh asked, does that mean the United States of America too? She responded with a resounding yes.
The truth of Fatima does not depend upon you believing it or not believing it. The truth of Fatima is, it's a message from God, certified by the miracle of the Son. But if you think, well, maybe somebody's made a mistake in logic or something like that, well, maybe it's not correct. But if it is correct, you've got everything to lose. You paid 40 years or 20 years on your mortgage in your house. You paid 20, 30 years investing in your children. They're going to be enslaved, tortured, killed. You yourself, your wife, your husband. You've got everything to lose in this world because the Pope and the bishops refuse to do or request, which costs them nothing, which is just a pious thing which they should do anyway every so often. What's the big deal for them? And you've got everything to lose. I say it doesn't cost you anything to pick up the phone and say you would like him to do it. And let me tell you, as a non-Catholic, you might get more listened to than I have been for 25 years at promoting this work.
To this day, Russia has not been consecrated in the precise manner as commanded by God. Will Pope Benedict XVI continue the disastrous policy of not obeying God's command to consecrate Russia to her Immaculate Heart?
There have been only 21 General Councils of the Catholic Church in 2,000 years. The 21st and the most recent, the Second Vatican Council, was convened by Pope John XXIII in 1962 through 1965. The sudden and continuous liberalization which followed the Council's conclusion in 1965 has led some to speak of a conciliar church whose new beliefs, attitudes, and practices are different from those of the one holy Catholic Apostolic Church of all time.
In general, Fatima, I think, presents a scandal to the conciliar church because it takes faith and morals very seriously. The conciliar church is infected by relativism. I think that if you would take the errors listed and the various syllabi of errors composed by Pius IX and Pius X, that perhaps the contemporary church and its leaders would believe in many of them, as shocking as it may seem. Therefore, the stark faith of Fatima and its message that the wages of sin are most serious is something the conciliar church is very uncomfortable with. The consecration of Russia is part of the symbolism of the Fatima message. And therefore I think the conciliar church, infested as it is with relativism, subjectivism, religious pluralism, would like to put Fatima away somewhere. They'd like to hide it away somewhere. And therefore either they ignore it or they'll say its message has already been accomplished in order, I think, just to play down Fatima in general.
I think that there are powerful people in the Vatican who do not believe Our Lady of Fatima at all. They don't believe her, and they don't believe the message, and they have their own program, they have their own agenda. And that's why, and the message of Fatima is directly opposed to their own program. And so they have to get Fatima out of the way. But they can't say it publicly. It's like when our Lord was asked, asked the Pharisees, and he said to them, well, did John the Baptist, did he invent this baptism, or did God inspire him to do it? Our Lord's words were something more like this, did his baptism come from heaven, or did it come from man? And the Pharisees said to themselves, well, if we say it came from God, then he's going to ask us why we didn't do it. And so we can't say that. And if we say it came from man, but the people liked John the Baptist, so we can't say that either. So they said, we don't know. Similarly, Pharisees in the Vatican today don't believe that the message of Fatima comes from God. But they dare not say that to the public because they would be seen as not being reliable themselves and that they would not give their allegiance to them. So they pretend on the one hand to believe in it, but on the other side, they in fact fight it with all their might.
One of the Pope's highest advisors has confirmed that the Pope was advised not to mention Russia specifically in any consecration ceremony because it would offend the Russian Orthodox hierarchy and be a setback to ecumenical dialogue, which is one of these things we've seen arise in the past 40 years that has caused so much confusion in the Church. So in this case, with this Pope, we have a specific proof that he's been told positively not to mention Russia for diplomatic and ecumenical reasons.
I think the Pope fears that the consecration of Russia would give too much credence to traditionalist forces in the Church. It would be an embarrassment to him amongst his progressive friends and amongst the mainstream of the Church, and it would make those people that he has singled out for excommunication, for criticism, it would make those people seem a little more credible. That's the last thing he wants.
But I think that there has already been, at some level, an implicit surrender on the part of the leadership of the Church that does not jeopardize the Church's infallibility. We're not talking about any solemn ex cathedra pronouncements or anything, but there has been a concession on the part of the leadership of the Church to the mindset of our modern world. We need to speak to the modern world in the categories that they consider acceptable. They set the terms of the debate. We have to kind of dance to their tune.
So you have, right now, millions of Catholics out there who don't even know the story, or maybe they saw the Warner Brother video or movie years ago and they know that it happened, but that's it. So I would say it's a failure of those in the upper echelon of the Church to give Fatima the importance that it deserves.
So we know that something very strong is inhibiting those who are supposed to consecrate Russia from doing it. And the question is, what is that? And as Sister Lucia herself said, it's a diabolical disorientation, and I believe that is the case.
One part of the story of Fatima has been locked away from public view by those in power at the Vatican. That portion is known as the Third Secret.
Fatima scholars believe unanimously that the secret begins with the one sentence, "In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved," etc. End quotation. The etc. indicates that the Virgin at Fatima had a lot more to say about this subject of dogma, but the obvious implication of the statement that in Portugal the dogma of the faith will always be preserved is that elsewhere the dogma will not be preserved.
As long as I hold on to the dogma of the faith, I'm a Catholic. But if I lose the faith by following the bad example or the bad advice of cardinals or even a pope, then I leave the Church because I've no longer held on to the Catholic faith. So the integrity of the Church itself, in itself, is not in question, but the integrity of people's faith and their salvation is definitely in question.
And Fatima scholars unanimously concurred that this third secret, of which that sentence is the beginning, refers to a crisis of faith and discipline in the Church that would begin around 1960. Why do I say 1960? Because when Sister Lucy was asked about when the secret would be revealed, she said that Our Lady wished it to be revealed upon her death, but in no event later than 1960. And when asked why 1960, she said, because it will be clearer then.
On June 26, 2000, Vatican officials released what they said was the entire Third Secret of Fatima, but the published documentation does not include any of the words of Our Lady of Fatima that are indicated by the mysterious etc. The missing words have never been released.
The third secret, of course, according to the research that has been done, Cardinal Odey believed that it tied in with the present crisis of faith and also with the problems of the Second Vatican Council. Sister Lucy asked Our Lady, why not until 1960? And she said, because by then it'll be clearer. So the message of the third secret was supposed to be not only for 1960, but something that will be clear in 1960. And what we had going on in 1960 was the preparations of Vatican II. And Cardinal Odey said that if John the 23rd had found something positive about Vatican II or his way of doing things in that secret, he was a very optimistic fellow. You would have bet he would have revealed it. And the fact that he didn't say anything means he probably had things he didn't like. Not that he's going to say that the Fatima apparition was not true, but things that he didn't like, things that didn't square with the direction he was taking the church at the time.
The Catholic Church exercises a profoundly positive effect upon mankind. And therefore, I viewed with increasing dismay the dismantling of the Catholic faith in the aftermath of the Second Vatican Council.
The statement was made that at the latest, this third part of the message of Our Lady at Fatima, the so-called third secret, had to be revealed no later than 1960. When Pope Pius XII died in 1958 and his successor, Pope John the 23rd, opened the third secret and read it, he said, this is not for our time. And went on to inveigh against the prophets of doom and gloom that were always forecasting dark clouds over the horizon of the latter part of the 20th century. And he, on the other hand, felt that our attitude had to be very upbeat, very optimistic. Man is getting better and better. We're seeing the evolution of mankind to higher and higher levels of morality. I'm still looking for evidence of that, but maybe more sophisticated and highly technologically advanced ways of doing evil, certainly we have. But he again felt, for whatever reasons, ultimately known only to himself, that the revelation of the content of this message should not be done. Now you can read various interpretations of his failure to do his duty there. But his successor, Pope Paul VI, made exactly the same political decision, and so too did John Paul I in 1978 and John Paul II as well.
Since 1960 to this day, the full text of the Third Secret has not yet been released by any of the popes. Will Pope Benedict XVI continue the disastrous policy of not releasing the Third Secret?
Our Lady of Fatima said, "If my requests are granted, Russia will be converted and there will be peace. If my requests are not granted, Russia will spread her errors throughout the world, raising up wars and persecutions against the Church. The good will be martyred, the Holy Father will have much to suffer, various nations will be annihilated."
This is the world that we live in. We continue to fight. $798 billion spent in 1 year by third world countries for weapons, while their own people starve and live in fear. The death rate in our world continues to move at a staggering speed. Our religious leaders watch with sadness as new wars are protested through weak and ineffective means. Conflict and the threat of conflict are the most common media images we see in every corner of the world. In the farthest reaches of the planet, people who have no food have no difficulty finding a gun. The United Nations waves the dove of peace over children who live in poverty.
we fill our bellies from our plentiful resources and send some of our leftovers to the starving millions. We have felt the sting of anger and hatred on our own soil, and have responded with anger and hatred in a cry for justice. For the loss of 2 buildings, we have seen the fall of 2 entire nations. Whether that is right or wrong is irrelevant. The truth is that the circle of violence is still unbroken. Can we breathe a sigh of relief as we end another war and cast down another madman, when we fear that there will be another lurking around the next corner? Peace has eluded us like the wind. We can touch it with our fingertips, but we cannot hold it in our hands. Peace and goodwill were offered to all mankind, but we have been such fools as to let it slip away. The United Nations has supposedly been formed for the purpose of bringing peace to the world through dialogue, negotiation, and diplomacy, but without significant lasting results. Peace marches have been prolific in every corner of the world. The cry for justice and peace has been paraded through our streets with shouts against injustice, conspiracy, and warmongering from the mouths of people without power, without influence, and often even without credibility. Since the United Nations proves itself to be largely ineffective to bring peace, then how can we expect loosely organized peace rallies to bring true peace to our warring world? America is arguably the most powerful nation in the world, and yet for all her strength, she cannot enforce peace on the entire planet. Does Russia truly have a diabolical future agenda to lie in wait and pounce on a world that is weak? Does the Church hold the final secret to world peace? Can the Pope, through one single action prescribed in Fatima in 1917, bring true lasting peace to our world? Shouldn't we at least try it?
How much can we believe that we'll have world peace just basing it on human beings and on humans' words? We have been so many times disappointed, even now, by promises and things and utopias and things like that. So I still think that it's probably more reliable what the Virgin said than what some of our chief of states say right now.
I think it's very important for mankind as a whole for the Church to take everything that was said at Fatima seriously.
If the consecration of Russia were to be performed, if it will be performed as Our Lady of Fatima requested, according to her specifications, we will avoid all of the chastisements and punishments that were threatened in the message of Fatima, including the annihilation of entire nations. This will be avoided. We have the promise that if this consecration is performed, what we have to gain is the conversion of Russia and world peace. These things have been promised by Our Lady of Fatima, just if the Pope and the bishops will perform this act of consecration. So, if that's all that heaven is requiring, then why not just do it?
So what I would say to a non-Catholic watching this program is, whether you believe it or not, it costs you nothing to suggest that perhaps the Pope ought to mention Russia in a ceremony consecrating Russia. Let's just see what happens. The approach that I would take with a non-Catholic is, what have we got to lose? I don't think any reasonable non-Catholic would object to this ceremony being conducted if there was one chance in a zillion that it would produce world peace. So, Catholic or not, the answer is, what have we got to lose?
If we only look at the last century, we have not had peace in the last century. Wars are going on and on and on. Our Lady of Fatima came and gave us the means for peace, which is the collegial consecration of Russia to be done by the Pope in union with all the bishops of the world. And she said then we would have a period of peace. Since we don't have this period of peace, we can assume that the only way we are going to get this period of peace is for this consecration to be done.
Now, what's it cost? It costs nothing. Nothing of effort, nothing of time, nothing for them to do it. Instead, if they don't do it, the costs are enormous. If they do it, all the benefits. They get world peace. handed to them on a platter.
Normal people, people on the street, ordinary people should be asking their bishops, should be saying, why aren't you doing this consecration? Why don't we try it? Let us see if it gives us peace. Our Lady has promised it. What have we to lose? Go and work with the Pope, go and do the collegial consecration of Russia, and let's see if we get peace. We've tried everything else and it's not working.
All mankind yearns for peace. People have always yearned for peace. But the notion that we can achieve peace without divine assistance is a grave error.
Why not just try it? We've tried everything else. The United Nations doesn't work. Well, it's godless anyway. The peace treaties don't work. The papal visits don't work. He goes to the Holy Land and they say, oh yes, Holy Father, we'll live together in peace, and he leaves and pow, 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 pow. Starts all over again. Papal trips don't work. Papal trips are much more expensive than just consecrating Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary and ordering all the bishops to do it in their cathedral. Doesn't even cost much. It's a letter sent out. You can do it by email, for goodness sakes. Why not just do it? I don't know. I don't know why they don't do it. There's nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Our world seems to be spinning out of control. All solutions to the problem of world peace have failed, and the growing spectre of violence hangs over us all. Yet the devotees of the message of Fatima persist in their belief that the words of the message contain the key to peace in our warring world, even if much of the leadership of their own church has abandoned the message in its pursuit of a more modern, worldly orientation. We are all aware of the bevy of apocalyptic prophecies concerning the future of humanity. Are we also aware that we are creatures of intelligence and choice? The millions of Catholics who still adhere to the message of Fatima in the midst of their troubled church insist that the choice for peace is as simple as a brief public ceremony prescribed by the Blessed Virgin and confirmed by an unprecedented public miracle. In a world gone mad, in which every avenue to true peace seems to lead to only further violence and bloodshed, these Catholics pose a challenge as simple as the message to which they cling. What have we got to lose by taking the Virgin's advice? You decide. For more information on the message of Our Lady, please visit our website at www.fatima.org.